My name is Olin. I'm a sophomore at ETHS, and I am here with...
Shawn Iles. I'm a candidate for 3rd Ward Council.
Okay, so Shawn, I'm going to ask you a couple questions as it relates to the environment, kind of from a youth perspective on some of them. So
Great.
First question is, how did you get here today?
Unfortunately, I drove today. I do not enjoy driving, but it is raining outside, and I'm a bit of a fair weather biker, and I didn't have time to walk. I like to walk, but today I didn't have time.
All right. Why are you running for city council?
For me, it's because we're at an inflection point. And so I work with the unhoused. I am the overnight shelter director for Interfaith Action of Evanston. And I think that, like most communities in America, Evanston is struggling with affordability and the unhoused. And so I think I'm uniquely qualified to talk about that and to use my expertise from the dais. Nobody else has that expertise. And, I'm worried that we are losing our socioeconomic and our racial diversity. And I would like to be involved in shaping a reversal of that.
Cool. So thinking about the different ways that all the council members can use their unique abilities to help address the climate crisis, what would you say is your kind of climate superpower or climate strength?
Well, my superpower is the ability to build consensus, which is really how you accomplish things at the local government level. I think 3 terms on the library board, I proved that I was able to build consensus. I was transparent. I think that's essentially my superpower. And I think it's useful not just in climate, but in many of the other ways that council members are able to exert influence.
Cool. So what are the 2 most important issues that you are focusing on in your campaign and why?
I'm interested in transit-adjacent development. And so I think it's really important to increase the number of units, to put a downward pressure on price, to grow our tax base, and to bring consumers where we need them. I think that's particularly important downtown. We have a lot of economic stagnation and empty retail downtown. Part of the reason that we're struggling is because we had relied previously on office workers, and those office workers aren't coming back. And so we need to adjust the balance between the people that work here and the people that live here. We need more residents downtown. That's one. I guess you asked me for a second one. The 3rd Ward is responsible for a lot of the lakefront as well. And so it's really important. We just saw the shoreline stabilization project last council meeting that was presented. We need to spend some of our capital funds on making sure we shore up that lakefront over the next few years to make sure it's available for the next generation. And I think that it's important we pass a lakefront protection ordinance, which we do not have, again, to prevent the commercialization of our lakefront so that it's available for your generation in the future.
So many of the policies that are before City Council are future-focused, like Envision Evanston, the Healthy Buildings Ordinance, and CARP. These policies will have a bigger impact on the lives of young people than anybody else, and yet youth voices are often not listened to. How will you elevate youth voices if you are elected to City Council?
That's a good question. I've never had that question before. I think it's really important for council members to communicate well with their constituents and not just listen to the loudest voices. And I think a lot of times when it comes to Envision 2045 in particular, the loudest voices have been older single-family home owners. And I think it's something that I learned on the library board, that just because there's 200 or even 300 loud voices that show up at the meeting or show up at council they're not necessarily representative of the city at large. And so I think it's really important that a council person finds a number of different ways to reach out to constituents, including constituents of your age. I agree with you. Envision 2045 is your thoughts on it they carry more weight than the older generation, just because it's going to be you that lives with the consequences of those decisions. So.
All right, moving into some healthy buildings ordinance questions. So 80% of carbon emissions come from the building sector, and a good chunk of those come from the 500 largest buildings in Evanston. So the proposed healthy buildings ordinance would mandate energy efficiency improvements, procure renewable energy, and reduce on-site emissions, and has provisions to ensure that this is done while maintaining affordability. So do you support the proposed healthy buildings ordinance in its current form? Why or why not?
The current form is the key part of that question for me. I do support the premise and the goals. I understand and support our CARP goals. I know that we have picked a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and now we have some difficult and more expensive decisions to make. The physics of global warming is in conflict with the economics of capitalism, and nature just doesn't really care how much it costs to fix things. I have no problem with the city leading on this with their buildings. I'm not worried about Northwestern. I'm not shedding a tear for them, or the hospitals or Rotary International, like buildings like that. My one concern with the Healthy Buildings Ordinance is how it affects small business and smaller condo owners. And so when I'm talking to small business owners along the main Dempster Mile, I hear a lot about how it's an unfair playing field between Evanston and some of the surrounding communities. It's a lot harder to do business here. It's a lot more expensive to do business here. And I've heard a lot of concerns from smaller condo buildings in the Third Ward that they're concerned about how they're going to be able to afford to meet the requirements of the Healthy Buildings Ordinance. So I'm not opposed to passing it. I just don't think it's there yet. So I'm glad that it's been pushed a couple times and that we're talking about it. I think that those committees that make the decisions going forward about what the rules are going to be and how they're going to be applied, they need to have significant presence from small business owners and small condo owners on those committees. Those are some things I'd like to see. That being said, I'm all in favor of phasing out natural gas. I think there's plenty of time to do that. I'm all in favor of applying these parameters to any new construction, things like that. But it's a really tough. It's tough to look a Third Ward condo owner in the face and tell them that this is going to be an expense that's coming for them. Again, I think the city can lead on this. I'm not shedding any tears for Northwestern, but that's my concern. As long as I see that in there, I could move forward on it.
All right. So if you were on council now, what provisions would you propose be amended?
It's those committees. Like how are those going to be populated? That's the thing that I'm sort of as I'm watching the debate and as I'm reading about it. And this is not my area of expertise, and so I am relying on friends, people that I know, like Jonathan Newsma, and people that have endorsed me, like Cam Davis. I'm relying on them for some advice on the environmental front to a certain extent. And my own wife, who is very much, you better get this right if you're going to run for office. As I see the debate, the concerns that I think Bobby Burns is bringing up, that's probably right about where I'm at. Like who's on these committees? Can we make sure that they're populated by the people that are going to be impacted by them?
Cool. So one last thing I want to touch on is I think city council is kind of expected to provide, to be kind of role models for the city's youth and for the city as a whole of how to engage civically in a way that's meaningful and work together to get things done. But through Envision Evanston and the Healthy Buildings Ordinance and other controversial policies, I would say the council has not always shown the best example of being able to work together to solve issues. So if you were on the council, how would you address working with people that maybe you don't always agree with to solve issues?
Yeah, I think that is one of my strengths. Again, in the leadership roles I've had in Rotary and the PTA and especially on the library board, I have learned to work collaboratively. I do agree that we need to return to an era of civil discourse. I am perfectly capable of disagreeing productively with someone. I'm also capable of a perspective shift. Just because you start at one point, as you're having conversations with someone, you got to be able to put yourself in their shoes and see things from their perspective. You can't be so locked into your initial thoughts that you don't have any movement. And so I expect to be able to work productively with other people. I'm not someone that, I really don't care where a good idea comes from. I'm not someone who grandstands from the dais. I'm more likely to be standing off to the side, talking to somebody, explaining my position, hearing their position, than making a speech from the dais. That's not really my style. It's never been my style.
All right. I want to ask two third ward specific questions, and then we'll wrap up. So the first is regarding the Chicago Avenue corridor improvements. You can kind of take this question however you like. Obviously, there's some parallels in terms of the streetscape updates that are being planned, as well as the proposed upzoning. So what do you see as the future for Chicago Avenue compared to where it is now? And do you think that the policies that are being proposed by the city now, again, whether it be transportation related or building related, do you think those policies are helping to achieve the ideal vision that you have for Chicago Avenue in the future? And if not, what changes would you like to see?
Well, there's two parts to it, right? So there's the Chicago corridor plan that includes the bike lanes. So that's a complete street project. So that's not just the protected bike lanes. It's also redoing the street lighting, redoing the traffic lighting, the timing, the curbs. Makes them ADA compliant. It resurfaces the street and does a little bit of work underneath. That's great. I think that's great for the Chicago corridor. I'm very excited about it. I don't want to see that delayed any further. I expect work to start on that in 2027. I think it's going to be a boon for businesses on the main Dempster Mile. I think there's a lot of studies that show that bike access is great for small businesses. On the transportation front, some of those stations are not ADA compliant. That's something that we need to advocate for. On the Envision 2045 front, like I said before, I am in favor of transit-adjacent development. I think there are pockets along the west side of Chicago Avenue that are appropriate for development, and I would like to see that in the future. Places like where the Nissan dealership is. I think that's a perfectly appropriate place for transit-adjacent development. Same with the car lot that's just north of that, and the car repair place that's just south of that. Now, there's successful businesses in all three of those locations, so I don't expect a rapid change. I don't think that developers there's this image as we talk about Envision 2045 that there are developers just chomping at the bit to just get a hold of our most precious assets. I've lived in my house in the third ward for 10 years. I've seen one development project on Chicago Avenue. The one at Main and Chicago. That's the only one I've seen in the last 10 years. And so I don't think there's going to be a rapid change. I also don't think it's appropriate to put up anything beyond 45 feet between Lee and Dempster on the east side of the street. So that's bordering single-family historic homes. That's where the VW dealership is, where Binny's is, and where Trader Joe's is. So I wouldn't make that change.
Cool. So my last question is, could be an impact now or in the future that you foresee happening, but what is the biggest effect that climate change will have on the third ward, and how would you address that if you were elected?
Yeah. It's hard to say, right? Climate change is unpredictable. We're certainly going to see bigger storms. We could see a change to the height of the lake. You know, a couple years ago, the lake was significantly higher, and it looked like it was going to do some pretty significant damage. And there has been some pretty significant damage to the shoreline. I'm a big fan of nature-based shoreline solutions. I think a lot of times it's better to minimize hardscapes, hard structures that do as much damage as they mitigate. I'm a big fan of the dune restoration project that they did at Lighthouse Beach. I think that's much more resilient and it recovers quicker than other types of shoreline shoring up. When it comes to, the storm bits, we have to make sure that our infrastructure has got some climate resilient measures in it, things like rain gardens, permeable surfaces, green rooftops, things like that, so that we can mitigate against flooding and things like that. Those are things that come to mind when you ask me that question.
Cool. So thank you for coming out. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we let you go?
No, I'm glad you're asking questions. Keep it up. So please keep the pressure on. Make sure that your elected officials hear what you have to say, because, like I said before, a lot of these things are going to affect you more than they're going to affect my generation and older generations. You're going to have to live with the consequences.